is Lucas Ross, and you're watching our Lucas Ross Sports channel. And it's time to take a look at the AP Top 25 after week number 4 and heading into week number 5 of the 2022 college football season. Week number 4, there weren't really a lot of surprises, but some of those surprises came when, a non-conference team played a Power 5 team. Northwestern was beat. You look at the top 25, though, coming into this week, a lot of changes to the top 25. Basically, the only change that I think happened was Oklahoma moving down in the top 25 after a loss to Kansas State. So new teams have joined the top 25, and the top 5 is not really different. The top 5 is pretty much the same after week, so pretty much the same top 5 teams, heading into week number 5. But week number 5 could really shake things up, when the conference games start to begin. And conference games really began, this weekend. You had Michigan defeating Maryland. That game ended up being that close. And then you had Tennessee versus Florida. Florida's out of the top 25 now. But let's get right into this top 25. I'm going to give my honest thoughts on the top 25. And I will really give my honest thoughts of what I think about it, what is wrong about it. But let's get right into it here. We start from 21 through 25. Kansas State, a new team into the top 25 after just beating Oklahoma. And I just talked about Oklahoma getting beat. Oklahoma had that game coming off that big one against Nebraska a week ago. Kansas State coming off that loss to Tulane. And Kansas State comes in on the road and defeats the Sooners. And now they're ranked in the top 25 after that win. So I was kind of expecting a different team, though, a little bit than Kansas State. Maybe perhaps Kansas, perhaps. I mean, you look at the Big 12, that conference is wide open. I mean, I said it on my takeaway videos from yesterday. The Big 12 is just wide open from, the conference. I mean, Kansas State, Oklahoma could still win it. Texas could win it. But, Texas and Oklahoma are both coming off some losses. And, of course, Texas is out of the top 25 as well. But Kansas State, they are rolling. I mean, both Kansas and Kansas State. Big 12 is wide open overall for all these teams. Anybody can win it. West Virginia can win it as well. But a big win there against Oklahoma. Pittsburgh remains at number 24. Coming off a big win against Rhode Island. Big-time win there for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's kind of been quiet ever since losing to Tennessee. I mean, I haven't really been studying Pittsburgh that much ever since they lost to Tennessee. But they do get into, ACC play against Georgia Tech this week. So that should be an easy win there. Georgia Tech isn't all that good. They lost to UCF. So I think Pittsburgh will be back to where it needs to be. And with Miami in the Coastal Division starting to fall apart, Pittsburgh can still win this division, even with that one loss to Tennessee. And they haven't lost a conference game yet. And then Florida State, they are 4-0 at number 23. How about the Seminoles this year? And I tell you, I've been really impressed with the Seminoles at what Mike Norvell has done for this team. And like I said, when we went to the offseason, I said Florida State was a team that you don't want to sleep on. They have a lot of production coming back, and that's what they've been doing. Florida State's been, going into games, not taking care of business in them, but winning these close games. And that's what Florida State's done. They played a total of 60 minutes. And that's what their winning games all about. So Florida State is at 4-0. They are ranked number 23. They will play, of course, Wake Forest this Saturday. That is going to be a good one. Good news is you get that game at home. And speaking of Wake Forest, they are at number 22, just dropping down in a loss to Clemson. Of course, Clemson, beat Wake Forest here. But Wake Forest's offense looked really good in this game. Like I said, Wake Forest, I knew their offense would be really good in this one, but it wasn't enough to beat Clemson in this game. And I had Clemson defeating Wake Forest in the preseason, so Wake Forest had high expectations to be the team that could beat Clemson. Now I think Clemson is the team to beat out of the ACC Atlantic, but Florida State, you don't want to sleep on them as well, so don't really sleep on these two teams. They could still win it. Minnesota, out of the Big Ten West, they are 4-0, new addition to the top 25. Minnesota coming off that big-time win over Michigan State. Michigan State has not been all that good so far this year. Minnesota, they're pretty much controlling the West as well in the Big Ten West. Wisconsin lost to Ohio State. Northwestern isn't all that good. Nebraska isn't all that good. I mean, Minnesota has total control of the Western Division. And Iowa's offense is terrible. They can't really score a lot of points. So Minnesota has really been controlling that, division. And coming off a big-time win against Michigan State on the road is a big accomplishment. So that's the rankings from 21 through 25. Let's go to 16 through 20. Arkansas at number 20, coming off a loss to Texas A&M this past Saturday. It was a heartbreaking loss. You look at Arkansas, they had a 14-0 lead, in the first quarter. And then Texas A&M started to really get, things rolling with Max Johnson at quarterback. I think if Texas A&M has Matt Johnson at quarterback for the rest of the year, Texas A&M is going to be a really tremendous team. And, that's got to be a big-time upset there if Texas A&M was able to defeat Arkansas. A top 10 team as well. They dropped down 10 spots overall after this loss to Texas A&M. It was a really good game. It was a really good game between these two rivals. And it was a pretty emotional win for Texas A&M after, the loss to Appalachian State. Then a big win against Miami last week, which Miami has not been that good now in the last 2 weeks of the college football season. And then Arkansas, they don't really fall apart, though. I think they're still a really good football team. But they still have to play, BYU on the schedule. They still have to play all those tough teams. And they have to play Alabama this week, which is going to be really tough there for them. So Arkansas at number 20. BYU comes in at number 19. BYU plays, Wyoming. They played Wyoming, in week number 4. Picked up a big win there, so BYU is still capable of going to a New Year's Six Bowl perhaps. But they do play Utah State coming up this weekend. It shouldn't really be a big challenge for BYU, so I think they'll start to get back into winning ways after getting crushed by Oregon a week ago. So not really much to talk about BYU. Oklahoma comes in at number 18. They dropped down after losing to Kansas State. Like I mentioned, Oklahoma losing to Kansas State. And like I mentioned, this Big 12 conference is wide open. It's really wide open. Anybody can win this conference. Oklahoma and Texas can still win it perhaps, but don't really sleep on these other teams. West Virginia could still win it. They're coming off a big win against Virginia Tech on the road. The Big 12 has been so good so far. I mean, this Big 12 conference is starting to look really good. TCU's undefeated as well. Of course, they haven't played a conference game yet, but I think they will soon. And, of course, that's going to be the big difference there. If, all these Big 12 teams start to pick up, we could see a potential Big 12 team in the playoff, probably perhaps the end of the year. Texas A&M at number 17, coming off that big win against Arkansas. And Texas A&M's getting better. They look really better right now. We're starting to learn about more of these teams now as we get into the month of October, which is starting this Saturday. And Texas A&M does play Mississippi State on the road. Two great offensive teams going at it this weekend. It's not going to be an easy game for Texas A&M. I mean, you look at Mississippi State, they're pretty good on offense. I mean, Will Rogers versus Mac Johnson should be a really good quarterback matchup. So I'm expecting a really good game there. Baylor, coming off that win against Iowa State, they're ranked number 16. They were at number 17 last week, so just moved up a spot. And remember, they only won that game by 7 points. Iowa State is a really good team. Iowa State, I thought they were going to be a little bit young this year, but they turned out to be really good than I expected. But Baylor, they come out in the top in the end, so I think Baylor's going to have a chance to maybe win the Big 12 as well. We have a lot of Big 12 teams in the top 25, which is pretty interesting for me as well. I mean, I thought the Big 12 was always a weak conference a little bit, but it's looking pretty good for all the Big 12 teams so far. Let's go through 11 through 15 now, and it's Washington at number 15. They are undefeated at 4-0, coming off some big-time wins against Michigan State at home and then, of course, Stanford at home. So I expected Washington to start out really good, though. I mean, I was really high on this team going into this season, and I knew they were going to come out here and start to really shine a little bit. And Washington's getting better as a team as well. We're starting to see these teams get a lot better as the season progresses. Washington, though, they're coming off some 2 big-time wins against, of course, Michigan State and then, of course, Stanford. So they get their first Pac-12 win. And they play UCLA this Friday. Going to be a really good matchup there. Both teams are pretty much undefeated. UCLA, I thought they would be ranked maybe in the top 25 this weekend, but, of course, they played Colorado, which Colorado is terrible, so I don't think they would be ranked in the top 25. Ole Miss, number 14, they play Kentucky this weekend. Going to be a big matchup there. They are 4-0, so is Kentucky. Kentucky didn't really perform well in their game this weekend, But I'm expecting Ole Miss to get better, but they didn't really play as good as I thought against Tulsa. So both Kentucky and Ole Miss, I think this is going to be a shootout type game, high scoring game as well between two great offensive teams. I think Kentucky has the better defense. We've seen that in the Florida game where they really shined in that one. But Ole Miss, I think, has the better offense in this game. I mean, especially with the way Lane Kiffin coaches, but this is going to be a good one. This will be a good one between Ole Miss and Kentucky. But Ole Miss coming off a big win against Tulsa, but it wasn't a big win, but it was just a, close game than I expected it to be. We can see that this Ole Miss team is starting to get better. Oregon at number 13. Boy, Oregon barely beaten Washington State. I mean, this was a closer game than I expected. They were ranked number 15 last weekend. Oregon coming off that big-time win against Washington State, though, on the road. If they would have lost that game, Oregon's playoff hopes would have been over in an automatic draw. I mean, of course, they're 3-1. I mean, that one loss is coming to Georgia, earlier in the year. Oregon, I thought they were going to get doubted a little bit more after that loss to Georgia. But I could see this team is getting better. Bo Nix is starting to get better a little bit at quarterback, so I'm expecting him to continue to do that for the rest of the year. Speaking of the Pac-12, Utah at number 12 here. Utah, obviously, I'm not giving up on this Utah team like I've said in all the previous videos that I've mentioned Utah. I think this Utah team is still a playoff contender. They're, still battling for that spot. I mean, they're trying to get there to that, big ranking. They played Oregon State this weekend coming up. Oregon State almost beat USC in the Pac-12 conference, but they beat Arizona State this past Saturday, so not a lot to talk about for Utah. Instead, they, just get a big win over Arizona State. Penn State at number 11, they are 4-0. So pretty much Michigan, it's now Michigan, Ohio State, and, and Penn State here in this Eastern Division. It's starting to look like these three teams might be the top three teams out of the East this year. Penn State, though, they have been a big surprise so far this season. Sean Clifford looks pretty good at quarterback. I mean, this team will get better as the season goes on, but they still have to play, Ohio State and Michigan at the, as the season progresses. They also have to play Michigan State. I mean, Michigan State is not all that really good right now, but you never know what can happen. They could lose some games down the stretch. And I think those games could come to Michigan or Ohio State. But Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, they're pretty much the top teams out of the, Big Ten East right now. So not a lot to talk about for Penn State. Let's go to the 6 through 10 rankings now. And that's NC State at number 10. NC State coming off a big win over UConn this past Saturday. And they have a big-time showdown against them this Saturday when they play Clemson. That is going to be a big-time matchup there between the Wolfpack and Tigers. It's a big revenge game for Clemson after what NC State did last year. NC State defeated Clemson last year. And this game could be really close. I mean, NC State has had some, tough games to begin the year, but they looked like a really good top 10 team last weekend, or actually I should say this past weekend against UConn. So I think they look really good there. So they are 4-0 now. And pretty much the Atlantic Division, I think, is pretty much going to be wide open. If NC State beats Clemson this weekend, that division is wide open, with Florida State as well in there in that conversation. Number 9 is Oklahoma State. They had a bye week, so not really much to talk about them. But a lot of Big 12 teams in this top 25. So let's skip ahead to number 8. Tennessee at number 8. They defeated Florida this past weekend. That's a big-time win for Tennessee. They are 4-0. Heading into a bye week this weekend. They play LSU next October the 8th, so we don't really have much to talk about Tennessee other than the offense was really good. Hendon Hooker looked really good at quarterback. And, they had Cedric Tillman out in that game, but Tennessee still proved to be really good on offense. They have a lot of weapons at wide receiver, including the USC transfer as well. So they have a lot of weapons. So Tennessee is 4-0. Kentucky at 4-0 as well. Kentucky and Tennessee are pretty much the teams that I think can beat Georgia this season. They're pretty much the only teams. Florida is pretty much out of that conversation. Missouri losing to Auburn. Vanderbilt's pretty much out of that conversation as well, which Vanderbilt looked terrible in the game against Alabama. So Kentucky and Tennessee are pretty much at the, pretty much close to Georgia, but Georgia, of course, is still the dominant team in the SEC East. Kentucky, though, they play Ole Miss this weekend, which wouldn't be really a big surprise because that game is a West versus East matchup. So it won't be Kentucky that, is facing a, East opponent. But Kentucky and Tennessee both have to play, Western opponents. You look at Tennessee's schedule, they have to play Alabama and LSU. They play LSU first, then Alabama, and then Kentucky plays, Ole Miss and then South Carolina. So both of these teams have big games coming up, but we'll see how they go. Number 6 is USC. They're coming off a thrilling win over Oregon State on the road. That game ended up being closer, and USC only scored 17 points, so it's really their only lowest scoring game so far this season. I still think this USC team is a playoff contender. I don't really want to sleep on this team. They look really good. So, I'm expecting USC to start, scoring more points once again. They play Arizona State this Saturday, so they should really take care of business in that game. Arizona State fired their head coach at the early part of the year. All right, let's go to the top 5 now. Not much of a change here in the top 5. Clemson, number 5. Michigan at number 4, Ohio State at number 3, and Alabama and Georgia as the top 2. Georgia, though, actually, let's start with Clemson first. Coming off a win against Wake Forest in overtime, that game ended up being closer than expected. I expected that one to be closer, and I think Clemson is a playoff team. If you saw my 5 takeaway videos from yesterday, I think this Clemson team is a playoff contender. So I think they are pretty much a playoff contender. DJ Ogilvy looked pretty good. I'd say this was probably almost his best game against Wake Forest. So I'm expecting DJ Ogilvy to be a really good quarterback by the end of the year. So Michigan at number 4, they're coming off a big win against Maryland. Not a big win, but, the offense kind of struggled in this game. And I knew going into this game, Michigan was going to have a tough time on offense because Maryland, they have a pretty good defense. I don't really want to sleep on that Maryland team. I think they're still maybe a East contender, but, Michigan, though, they come out with the win. Michigan and Clemson both have pretty tough matchups this weekend, but they were both pretty good in their games. Clemson will play NC State this Saturday, and then Michigan will play Iowa on the road. But Iowa's offense hasn't really been that good. Let's be honest, their offense has not been good. The defense has been good, but, the offense just can't get it going. And Ohio State at number 3, they're pretty much in control of the East right now. They were really explosive against Wisconsin on Saturday. Blew them out there. It was a 52-21 win. They play the Rutgers this Saturday. So the Rutgers, though, they're coming off a loss to Iowa. The Rutgers, I thought they would give Iowa a scare, but it didn't happen. Ohio State, will play the Rutgers, though, this Saturday. It is a home game, so. And then Alabama comes in at number 2. I thought Alabama would probably be the new number 1 team coming into this weekend. Due to Georgia, not competing against Kent State. Alabama, though, they blew out Vanderbilt. Not really much to talk about that, but, other than Alabama just dominated that game. And then Georgia at number 1, they remain the number 1 team, even though they only won against Kent State. Georgia, obviously, I guess they weren't ready for this game. They pretty much overlooked Kent State a little bit. And I think they're just focused on SEC play, but they didn't bring their A game against Kent State. They allowed 22 points in that game. But still, I think this Georgia team is still one of the most dangerous offenses in the country. Maybe perhaps Ohio State and Alabama could join that conversation. But all these top 5 teams, they all have great offenses. And these are pretty much the top 5 teams that are dominating so far this season. Well, Clemson and Michigan, they could slip up. Maybe Ohio State will probably slip up. Maybe Alabama and Georgia might slip up. But, this is going to be a wide-open top 25 by the end of the year. But that concludes the top 25 video. My thoughts on it is the top 5. I think Alabama probably could have been the new number 1 team this week. Maybe Ohio State will probably be in the number 1 team. But, there was a lot of changes to this top 25, but the top 5 is pretty much the same. So, but, I like to give y'all's thoughts on the top 25 as well, which team could have joined the top 25 as well. And stay tuned here for more on the Lucas Ross Sports Channel.